Some crimes make headlines, others become legends. And then there are the ones that leave behind questions and empty frames. In the early hours of March 18, 1990, while Boston slept, two men made history without leaving a trace. These men walked in wearing Boston police uniforms and carrying nothing but confidence. They stepped into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and stepped out with $500 million in stolen art. No sirens, no smashed glass, just a vanishing act that still baffles the world. 30 years later, the frames still hang empty, a haunting gallery of absence. This wasn't just the biggest art heist in history, it was a threat to the idea that some treasures are untouchable. Because when history can disappear in 81 quiet minutes, what else can be taken without a sound? This story retraces the steps of a flawless theft, but along the way, it uncovers the blind spots of FBI missteps and the strange cult of prestige around what we choose to protect and what we let vanish. Decades later, the case remains unsolved. But to understand how that happened, we have to go back to the night it all began. Hey, AI Conspiracy Squad, it's just me, Tony. No robots, no code, just vocal cords. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're Team Human. Chapter 1. A Museum Frozen in Time. Before it was a crime scene, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was a monument to obsession. Tucked away in Boston's Fenway neighborhood, it was never meant to be just another gallery. It was a home-turned-museum, crafted down to the last detail by Isabella herself. Every painting, every sculpture was placed exactly where she wanted it. And in her will, she made one thing crystal clear. It had to stay that way. There were no additions or renovations. Not a single painting could be moved. To walk through the Gardner was to step inside a frozen moment. The Venetian courtyard, the dim Dutch room, the cracked tiles and faded walls. It was all carefully preserved. A museum that wasn't allowed to evolve. But that devotion to permanence came at a cost. Because what the museum made sacred also made it vulnerable. The Gardner was a time capsule, and time capsules aren't built for defense. Alarms were outdated. Security staff were minimal. Doors were old and trust was high. It was a place designed to showcase beauty, not to guard against what might come through the door in the middle of the night. That's what made the theft more than just shocking. It was a violation of something meant to be untouchable. 13 pieces of art were torn from a space that was never meant to change. It lost its illusion of safety, a belief that beauty, once framed and displayed, would be left alone. And in the stillness that followed, the Gardner became something it was never supposed to be, a museum of stolen treasure. Chapter 2. Two Cops at the Door. It was just after 1:20 a.m. on March 18, 1990. Boston was quiet in the deep hours of the night. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, two young security guards were finishing another slow, uneventful shift. Then the buzzer rang. Outside, two men stood dressed as Boston police officers. One of them leaned into the intercom and said they were responding to a disturbance, a routine check, nothing serious. But the guards hesitated briefly as they weren't professional. One was in his 20s, the other still a student working weekends. They had minimal training, and in that moment, instinct gave way to the authority of a badge and uniform, so they opened the door. Security footage from that night shows it clearly. They all had a calm conversation and no one raised alarms. One guard steps out from behind the front desk to speak with the officers. He was told there's a warrant out for his arrest. It was a confusing situation, but there's no struggle, so he complies and they handcuff him. Then the other guard is called down. He's cuffed too, and still no panic. Within minutes, both guards are led to the basement. They're forced to sit. Their hands and their legs are wrapped in duct tape, their eyes covered. Alarm buttons within reach, but by then, it's far too late. In under 5 minutes, the museum is no longer theirs. It belongs to the men in uniform. At this point, the thieves had free run of the museum. The building, packed with some of the most priceless works of art in the world, was wide open. What followed was not a smash and grab, it was a slow and intentional operation, but it all began with the simplest con. Two men at a door, wearing the right costumes, speaking with the right tone, counting on one thing: that in a place built to protect art, no one was protecting the people inside. This resulted in the biggest art heist in history. 2 uniforms, 2 badges, and 0 resistance. Sometimes the right look is all it takes. And speaking of realistic illusions, all the cash visuals you've seen in this video, totally fake, thanks to the team at Prop Money. These are the same pros that supply movies, music videos, and TV shows with incredibly lifelike prop currency. So if you're a filmmaker, content creator, or just want to shoot a scene without getting arrested, head to propmoney.com. Links below. Chapter 3. 13 masterpieces gone in the night. For 81 minutes, the thieves wandered the museum's dark halls like they owned them. When the sun rose, 13 pieces were gone. Paintings were cut from their frames. Sculptures vanished from their stands. Among them was the Concert by Johannes Vermeer. For context, only 36 known Vermeers exist in the world. Now, one is missing. Meanwhile, they also took Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, his only seascape, a shipwreck of biblical scale painted in 1633. Ironically, the only self-portrait Rembrandt ever painted into a storm. Now, the boat and the artist have vanished into the dark. There was Ches Tortoni by Manet, a gentleman sketching in a cafe, once proudly displayed in a small side room, and now gone. 5 works by Degas, small, delicate drawings of horses and dancers, moments captured in motion, now frozen in memory. They even stole a bronze finial from the top of a Chinese flagstaff. It had no obvious value, but it was old, rare, and sacred, and yet what they left behind is just as baffling. Priceless Titian and Botticelli, the museum's most famous works, sat untouched, as if the thieves walked past them without a glance. It wasn't about grabbing the most expensive things. It wasn't even about the money, because they didn't steal cash. They stole stories, brushstrokes, and centuries of meaning. They stole moments that can't be remade. Each piece was a time capsule, a frozen window into a world now lost. And when they vanished, they took more than paint and canvas. They took the soul of the museum. And what remained were 13 empty frames left hanging by the staff. Chapter 4. Frames that still hang empty. The next morning, nothing looked out of place at first. The courtyard was still with doors unopened. Then the staff arrived, and what they found was shocking. 13 works of art stolen and disoriented guards tied up with duct tape in the basement. The art is nowhere to be found. Just empty frames hanging quietly on the walls, as if the paintings had disappeared on their own. At this point, the FBI was called immediately. This automatically became a federal case, one of the largest property crimes in U.S. history. But from the start, they were chasing shadows, as there were no fingerprints, footprints, or surveillance footage worth reviewing. The thieves had just walked in, taken $500 million in art, and left nothing behind but questions. And so began a search that would stretch across decades through mob families, art dealers, storage units, international borders, and rumored tips. Agents followed leads to warehouses in Brooklyn, to villas in Ireland, even to the back rooms of shady auction houses. Every time, the result was the same: no artwork in sight. And inside the museum, something unusual happened. The stolen frames weren't taken down. They weren't repaired and left exactly as they were. In fact, they still hang there today. Some say it was out of hope that the works would one day return and could be reinstalled in the spaces they once filled. Others say it was something deeper, that the frames became part of the story, part of the loss, a visual ghost of what was taken. So they became the crime scene and the gravestone. Every visitor who walks through the Dutch room stops in front of them. You don't need to know art history to feel it. In this case, the loss is visible. And even though most thefts end with something missing, this one never ended. Chapter 5. Everyone was a suspect. In the hours after the theft, the list of suspects grew fast, and it never really stopped. The job was too smooth and precise. No smashed cases, no hesitation. They knew which security flaws to exploit, how long they had, and which cameras didn't matter. That left investigators with two possibilities. Either it was pulled off by professionals, or someone on the inside had helped. The FBI quickly turned its attention to a familiar circle in Boston's criminal underworld. In the 1990s, the city's mob scene wasn't just alive, it was thriving with turf wars and rackets. Loyalty traded like currency, and if you needed something stolen, the mafia had a guy for that. One of the first names on the FBI's radar was Carmine Romano, a known figure in the New England mob. He controlled the waterfront and had access to exactly the kind of low-profile muscle that could pull off a job like this. Then came Bobby Donati, a flashy gangster with ties to art fencing and a love for leverage. Donati was the kind of guy who knew how valuable paintings could be, and his mission is not always for money, sometimes for power and political reasons. In this case, a stolen Vermeer isn't just priceless, it's insurance. And then there was David Turner, a more modern face in Boston's criminal ecosystem, a career thief with a reputation for violence. His name came up often in FBI files, but like the others, nothing ever stuck. The theory is that the theft wasn't about selling the paintings, it was about using them. In the world of organized crime, art isn't always currency. To many, it's collateral. Case in point, you can't walk into a bank with a Rembrandt, but you can trade it behind closed doors, use it to get out of jail, use it to buy silence, or use it to make someone disappear. That was the theory anyway. However, in 2013, more than 2 decades after the heist, the FBI made a bold announcement. They said they knew who had done it, but they couldn't prove it. No names were released, and no arrest was made. And most importantly, no art was recovered. It was the kind of revelation that gave just enough to stir the public, and just enough to frustrate them. If you know who did it, why aren't they in prison? If you know where the art is, why isn't it home? Maybe the paintings were stolen for a private collector, probably a billionaire obsessed with beauty, willing to fund a crime for the privilege of showing a Vermeer to no one. Maybe they were traded over and over again, used as bargaining chips in mafia deals that spiraled far from Boston to Europe to South America to vaults and villas and lost names. Maybe they're sitting in a storage unit, sealed in a crate, forgotten by the people who once knew their worth. Over the years, there have been tips and anonymous letters with cryptic voicemails and dead ends. Art experts have analyzed the cuts in the canvas. Former mobsters have spoken in half-truths. Psychics have checked in. One man even claimed he could feel the energy of the missing paintings from inside his apartment. For over 30 years, everyone has had an answer, but no one has had the truth. Chapter 6. A crime that became a legend. While many crimes faded with time, the Gardner Heist only kept growing. 35 years later, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum still offers a $10 million reward for information that leads to the return of the stolen art. It's one of the largest private rewards ever offered, and yet not a single piece has come back. The case remains open and technically active. Somewhere in a federal office, a file still sits labeled as unsolved, and it's not collecting dust. Former FBI agents still talk about it. Retired detectives revisit the evidence. Journalists retrace the timeline. Podcasters pick apart theories frame by frame, decade by decade. Art experts examine old auction catalogs like they're reading tea leaves. Shadow chasers, truth seekers, and obsessives are all caught in the gravity of a mystery that refuses to age, because this is an origin story for a modern myth. The Gardner Museum knows this. Walk through its halls today, and the crime is everywhere in the silence of what's missing. You don't need to know art to feel it. The emptiness is deliberate. However, the museum's identity has changed. It was once known for Isabella Stewart Gardner's bold collection, which includes Botticelli, Sargent, Titian, rare manuscripts, and sacred artifacts. Today, it's also known for what's not there. Some visitors come for the art. Many come for the crime. They want to stand in the Dutch room and see the cut canvas of Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee. They want to stare into the ghost of the Vermeer. They don't just look at what remains, they imagine what was stolen. Was the art destroyed? Hidden in a mobster's basement? Shipped overseas? Does someone, somewhere, sit alone with a Rembrandt they can never show? Nobody knows, and maybe that's the point. Because legends don't need endings, they feed on mystery. And this one has become a modern ghost story told in galleries, classrooms, and late-night conversations. Chapter 7. The Art That Isn't Here. The Gardner Heist has fascinated the world, not because of what happened, but because of everything that didn't. There were no gunshots, no smashed display cases, no high-speed getaway. Just two men in police uniforms, a calm voice over an intercom, and a walk through the museum that felt more like a rehearsal than a robbery. There were no arrests, no trial, no confessions rumored in prison cells or leaked to reporters. Decades of leads and not a single charge. There's been no recovery. Not one of the 13 missing pieces has surfaced. Not in black market auctions, not in mob vaults, not in dusty basements or anonymous tip-offs. Just frames, still empty, still waiting. And through it all, the museum itself has changed. What was once a monument to Isabella Stewart Gardner's taste has become a monument to loss. The museum became a crime scene that never cleaned itself up, a shrine to unanswered questions. In a world obsessed with proof, this is the perfect crime. Meanwhile, it's not the only major art theft in history, but it may be the only one that became folklore. In 1911, when the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre, it was found 2 years later. In 2004, armed thieves rappelled into Norway's Munch Museum and took the Scream. That too was recovered. Even the 2010 Paris Museum of Modern Art heist, 5 paintings worth over $100 million, eventually led to arrests. But the Gardner led to nothing. If the Gardner heist was a mystery of absence, the next story is a deception of presence, one where the art wasn't taken by thieves in the night, but handed over in daylight, wrapped in false credibility, and delivered straight into the hands of power. Because the only thing more valuable than stolen art is fake art that no one questions.